Sagittarius, the ninth sign of the zodiac, is the sign of the leaders and rulers in society who base their power on being a moral authority. Even if an individual or group attains power through violent means, they eventually must justify their rule on an ethical standard and belief system that they think that all society should live by. Sagittarius is the sign of this complex experience of using our belief system to become an authority in something, and how we use that power to make society a better place. It produces the moral arbiters such as the priest class, religious figures, politicians, gurus, academics, and in today's age, the interpreters of scientific research. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, which is the force within all of us that seeks to attain higher levels of knowledge in the search of true wisdom. But there is a dangerous and destructive side to Sagittarius that is rarely mentioned in ancient and modern astrological literature. The Vedic sage Jaimini gives the description of Sagittarius in just one brief sentence and nothing else. While proceeding, a fall from a vehicle or height. As we shall see, Sagittarius is the sign that causes a fall from grace, when spiritual knowledge and having a high position in society with prestige and moral authority can be abused in a self-righteous and arrogant manner to obtain or to hold on to worldly power. Eventually, these individuals experience an internal crisis of confidence, very often brought about by an external loss of their power through an event that humbles them, a revolt by their subjects, being exposed as a hypocrite, being corrupt, and most serious of all, abusing spiritual or religious doctrines as a means of political control. As with all of the zodiac signs, the sign symbol that has been passed down over generations contains numerous layers of meaning which help to reveal how the sign becomes manifest in human experience. I've spoken about the mythical creature Makara or Nakra, that is the ancient symbol of Capricorn, which was likely a type of sea monster related to a crocodile. Besides Capricorn, Sagittarius is the only other sign symbol of a mythical creature whose true origins are tangled in the mythology and cross-referencing of cultures over millennia. In Western astrology, Sagittarius is a centaur, a half-man, half-horse, shooting a bow and arrow either at the heart of the Scorpion constellation beside it, or shooting behind it towards its own tail. According to Vedic sources, Sagittarius is not a mythical centaur, but rather a man riding a horse with a bow and arrow. In both symbols, the horse represents power, and the upper torso of the man or the warrior shooting the bow and arrow at a target represents the quest to hit the bullseye of an ideal, a spiritual warrior to which perfection is within his sights. But the centaur creature is the most intriguing part of the symbol. In what cultural context did the centaur symbol first appear and develop? What can we learn about the expression of Sagittarius from the centaur? We're going to study a famous character from the Babylonian Talmud named Ashmedai, who was renamed Kitovras in later Slavic and Russian folk tales, that depicts this mythical half-animal, half-man as both a king of the demons, but also as an enlightened teacher whose wisdom rivaled the infamous Judaic king Solomon. There were many hybrid animal-beast creatures in ancient and classical literature and are a very common motif with almost endless variation. The most intellectually and sometimes spiritually advanced of these were the centaur race, most often depicted with the upper torso of a man and the lower body and legs of a horse, but sometimes the lower body of a goat, donkey, or a soft-pawed animal such as a lion. Whether centaurs were real creatures or not, they generally came to represent the idea of the dual nature of a human being. The half-man is the potential for elevating oneself towards enlightenment and spiritual understanding. The half-beast represents the animalistic side of human beings that are prone to the base urges of indulgence, sex, and materialism. Thus, a centaur is the embodiment of the struggle between a person's higher and lower natures. Astronomically speaking, let us remember that there are actually two centaurs depicted as constellations. There is Sagittarius, but there is also Centaurus, which is below the sign Libra and is not a part of the zodiac ring, and Centaurus is in a struggle with the wolf constellation Lupus. The word Centaurus and centaur comes from the Greek meaning bull killer and is probably related to the fact that when Taurus, the bull constellation, descends on the horizon in the night sky, Sagittarius is coming into view. The first depictions of a winged centaur appear on the Egyptian Dendera zodiac and on a Babylonian boundary stone from around 1200 BC. As I mentioned, centaurs as literal creatures and their influence upon society could have been the causal reason for it becoming a zodiac sign in these ancient cultures. The most well-known centaur comes from Greek mythology, Chiron, who was the tutor of many important personalities such as Achilles, Asclepius, and Jason, and taught them the art of warfare, music, astrology, prophecy, and medicine. A master healer, although ironically unable to heal himself after being shot by Hercules with a poisoned arrow, Chiron's suffering was put to an end by Zeus, who immortalized him as the Centaurus constellation. Chiron is also a celestial body discovered in 1977 and has a 49-year orbit through the zodiac. It has been adapted into Western astrology as the wounded healer archetype based on the Greek story. The far lesser mentioned centaur is the apocryphal literary character Kitovras, which is a Slavic derivative of the word centaur. Kitovras has appeared in iconography on the facades of Russian Orthodox churches, coins, figurines, manuscripts, wood carvings, bracelets, and other items beginning in the 11th and 12th centuries AD. This name was initially given to a specific character who we're going to study in detail shortly, but became a general term for all centaurs in Slavic and Russian folklore. This warrior sage is a complex personality, known for his savagery, demonic character, duplicity, wisdom, architectural skill, moral perfection, saving pedagogy, protection from evil, and religious sanctioned authority. But the tale of Kitovras was actually told in the Babylonian Talmud, the Orthodox Jewish text compiled from their oral tradition while they were captive in Babylon around the year 500 AD. The Talmud gradually spread into the Balkans and Russia in the 10th and 11th centuries, and the stories within it were adapted linguistically and thematically into those native cultures. In the Talmudic story, King Solomon is building his temple, but must do so without the use of stone and iron tools, and so he seeks the help of a powerful demon named Ashmedai. This Ashmedai is the same Kitovras, whose name was changed in the later Slavic retelling of the story. What is most notable is that the original Ashmedai is not a centaur, but a monstrous, shape-shifting, lust-filled demon with 3 heads, one of a man, one of a bull, and one of a ram, and the legs of a chicken or a bird. However, there is no single definite description of Ashmedai, and he can sometimes take the form of a handsome man. This begs the question, why was the character converted to a centaur creature in the Slavic Russian retelling? We are going to approach this question when we analyze the contents of the story and the important Sagittarian themes within it. The Talmudic story contains important elements that were left out of the Slavic Russian version, so we will study this longer and more thorough account. The story begins with Solomon's rabbis informing him that in order to construct the temple without iron tools, he must locate the Naxian stone, called the shamir in Arabic. It is the same piece of technology that Moses used in crafting stones that were used in the vest of his high priest. To find it, Solomon is told to summon male and female demons who may know its whereabouts. They apparently do not know themselves, but recommend asking Ashmedai, the prince of demons, who lives on a faraway mountain. Solomon is told that every day Ashmedai travels to the sky to the celestial school to learn a thing or two, then travels back down to the terrestrial school to learn how those teachings play out in practice. Solomon summons his chief commander, Benaiah, to locate and capture Ashmedai. To capture him, Benaiah fills up Ashmedai's well with wine instead of water and hides in wait to see Ashmedai's reaction. Ashmedai comes to examine his well and finds that, instead of water, there is wine. He says, "It is written, wine is a mocker, and strong drink is raging. He that is deceived thereby shall not become wise." A verse from Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1. But Eventually, he became incredibly thirsty and could no longer resist. He then reasons with himself, saying, "Wine maketh glad the heart of man, making the face radiant more than oil," from the book Psalms, chapter 104, verse 15. "I shall drink of it." He became drunk and then fell into a stupor. Solomon gave Benaiah a special chain with the name of God inscribed upon it, which he then locked onto Ashmedai while he was sleeping, capturing him. Benaiah then takes him to Solomon's palace. While on the journey to see him, Ashmedai encounters several scenes that make Benaiah scratch his chin. First, Ashmedai brushes up along every tree and destroys each one. Likewise, every house he walks by, he also destroys. Coming upon a cave-like dwelling, an old woman who was living inside pleaded to him not to destroy her humble abode. While bending down, Ashmedai breaks a bone in his own body, which awakens him to his angry and destructive condition, and recalls the scripture, "A soft tongue will break a person's bone." Ashmedai then saw a blind man struggling as he walked along the road. He lifted the man up and put him back on the right path. He then saw a drunkard that also erred on the path. He lifted him up. He then saw a place where there was merrymaking, wherein the people were exceedingly happy. But Ashmedai began to cry. He then heard a certain man saying to a cobbler, "Make me a pair of shoes that will last me for 7 years." Ashmedai began to laugh. He also saw a certain diviner who was divining for lost bread. Again, Ashmedai began to laugh. Later on in the story, Ashmedai would tell his capturer Benaiah why he reacted in these ways to these certain situations. Arriving at Solomon's palace, Ashmedai ended up waiting 3 days to receive an audience from the king, being told on the first day that Solomon was drinking too much, and on the second day that Solomon was eating too much. On the third day, Ashmedai tells Solomon the prince of the sea gave the mysterious shamir, which can build the temple without stone tools, to a hoopoe bird for safekeeping in the mountains. So Solomon sends Benaiah and his men to fetch it. The men trick the bird by laying a piece of glass over the bird's nest, covering the baby birds. The hoopoe bird uses the shamir to cut through the glass, and then the men startle it, causing the bird to drop the shamir, and then they grab it and head back to the palace to build Solomon's great temple. During the construction, Benaiah asks Ashmedai, "Tell me, all those things that you did when you astounded me by your conduct, what was the reason when you saw that blind man who erred on the road, that you lifted him up and put him on the right path?" Ashmedai answered, "It was because I heard them making a proclamation over him in heaven, saying that he was a holy, righteous man, and whoever gratifies his soul shall have a portion in the world to come." "So what was the reason when you saw that drunken man who erred on the path, that you lifted him up?" asked Benaiah. "It was because I heard them making a proclamation over him in heaven, saying that he was a holy, wicked man. Let him alone, that he might eat the good of his labors in this world, for he has nothing else coming to him in the world to come." Benaiah then asks, "And what was the reason when you saw the merrymaking that you began to cry?" Ashmedai answered, "It was because the man who had just been married, unaware of his plight, was to die within 30 days. Benaiah then asks, "So what was the reason when you heard that man saying to the cobbler, 'Make me a pair of shoes that will last me 7 years, why did you laugh?' Ashmedai said, "It was because that man had not even 7 more days to live. What was the use then to him having shoes that will last him 7 years? Finally, Benaiah asks, "And what was the reason when you saw that diviner you began to laugh?" Answered Ashmedai, "It was because he was sitting upon a treasure trove of riches fit for a king, only to divine for something else which he assumed might be beneath him." Ashmedai was imprisoned during the entire duration of the building of the temple, and one day was conversing with Solomon, who questioned him about how demons are able to exert power over human beings. Ashmedai told the king to remove the chains that bound him and to give him his special signet ring. Ashmedai took the ring and swallowed it, and with one of his wings hurled Solomon over 1,036 miles, banishing him into exile from his kingdom to live as a pauper. Because he had swallowed Solomon's ring, Ashmedai was able to take on Solomon's form and proceeded to copulate with all of Solomon's women and even insulted his mother Bathsheba. The court rabbis suspected something was wrong and advised everyone to check the king's feet, which would appear as the feet of a bird, proving that he was in fact the demon Ashmedai. Solomon was brought back to his kingdom, and Ashmedai quickly flew away to escape any type of punishment. From that day forward, Solomon slept with 60 armed guards around him and was filled with constant fear, trepidation, and terror at the thought of Ashmedai's return. So now let's look at how this tale reflects the attributes of Sagittarius as a zodiac sign and the deeper meanings we can derive from it. The Ashmedai Kitovras tale is, at its heart, a power struggle. Solomon was known as the wisest and most powerful king during his time, but we see that he met his match dealing with Ashmedai. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, the planet of spiritual and moral understanding, and Sagittarius is a male sign, meaning that it focuses our attention on the external world and exerting change upon it. So this is the sign of applying higher levels of knowledge into real-world situations, making it the sign of teachers, gurus, and the moral authority. In the Vedic tradition, each sign is ruled by a caste, and Sagittarius is the Kshatriya caste, which are the administrators and rulers of society, those in positions of power to establish and enforce the rule of law. The story begins with Solomon unable to complete his temple, the temple being the key to his maintaining religious authority he held over his kingdom. So the King Solomon is forced to establish contact with another authoritative figure, the prince of demons Ashmedai. And of course, the conflict also revolves around a critical resource, the shamir. The true nature of the shamir opens up a whole new can of worms. It's a secret technology that is left unexplained in the text. It has led to much speculation by contemporary historians and authors as possibly being 1, a kind of worm that can chew through stones, 2, a kind of high-precision laser, and 3, what I find most probable, some kind of device that can emit a form of high-frequency radiation that is able to slice through stone or manipulate hard objects, and that this technology has been lost or hidden from our modern construction methods. Instead of simply negotiating with Ashmedai, Solomon calls upon his chief commander Benaiah and orders him to capture Ashmedai and later the shamir, both of which are done through deceptive and manipulative means. When the stakes are high, or if the passion of the ruler is strong enough, those in power tend to spare no effort and will go to the ends of the earth to sustain and expand their control. Jupiter is an expansive planet whose influence in our psyche is to encompass as much of creation as possible in our belief system. The more pronounced Sagittarius is in our chart, the more we seek to create an all-encompassing philosophy to live according to and preach to others. A strong but unhealthy Sagittarius is a person who talks the talk but does not walk the walk. The other dark side of a strong but harmed Sagittarius, which pertains to Solomon, is when other people are not willfully following along with our dictates, and so the decision comes to use manipulative tactics to influence them. The fact that Solomon's commander empties his water well and fills it with wine to make him drunk and tired, and then uses a magical chain to bound Ashmedai to him, shows how the fragility of material power can easily corrupt a person into being coercive and attempting to bend others to your will by any means necessary. And of course, this is all justified by one's moral standing or the fact that you are a king. A harmed Sagittarius in a person's chart can lead a person to become arrogant, preachy, and self-righteous because they believe they know what's best for other people. And the thirst for this kind of influence and power over them becomes like a poisoned chalice they drink from that slowly erodes their moral sensibilities. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of the story is the character Ashmedai Kitovras himself. We are told he is a prince of demons, and the modern idea of a demon is that they are bent upon doing evil and harmful things to humanity. But as the story unfolds, we see Ashmedai having sudden ethical realizations and even helps some people on the road to Solomon's palace. We are told that Ashmedai visits the celestial school every day to learn higher principles of spirituality, and then returns to the terrestrial school to see how they play out on Earth. This reveals the higher nature of Sagittarius' influence upon us, the incessant curiosity and love of learning, specifically about how divine principles are lived in human life. And you can see here that Sagittarius creates this quality of having a theory and then testing that theory in practice. So Ashmedai is not simply a monster with a purely demonic agenda. He is complex and has the competing higher and lower natures attributed to the half-man, half-beast mythological creatures, most predominantly centaurs. This is likely why the Slavic Russian story was changed to a centaur, because centaurs in classical Greek mythology were creatures that symbolized the mixture of higher human faculties with the lower animal faculties, which was a well-known literary motif. Also, the origins of the centaur as the symbol of Sagittarius could have been that these creatures actually walked the earth at some point in history. Ashmedai Kitovras was one of many half-man, half-beast archetypes that were handed down through generations of storytelling since ancient Babylon and Egypt. Despite our ability to rise to higher spiritual levels, this attribute of Sagittarius shows that human beings are flawed. We must all acknowledge and cope with our animalistic tendencies and materialistic temptations. Ashmedai is torn between not drinking and drinking the wine, and even recites scripture to talk himself into not drinking, but he eventually gives in and sees a positive side of drinking wine, that it maketh glad the heart of man. Sagittarius is the sign of this battle between our higher and lower nature. On one hand, we strive towards living according to the higher principles of divine existence, while on the other hand, we are all prone to the desires of the human body. Achieving a balance between the two is the healthiest and most practical option, because when we go too far to an extreme and try to deny our lower nature, it becomes much easier to succumb to that lower nature in very dramatic fashion. And this is why Jaimini describes Sagittarius as a fall from a vehicle or a height, which is when a person is unable to just bend a little bit, and instead of just bending, they become more prone to breaking or falling. And likewise, on the other side of the spectrum, if our consciousness is driven by animalistic desires and we neglect striving to become a higher version of ourselves, we become demonic. In other words, a being that is a slave to materialistic sensations of the body. Sagittarius is of course the sign that produces teachers and those who give us wise counsel. As we see, Ashmedai provides aid to several figures along his journey, guiding a blind man and a drunkard, showing a humility and the ability for guiding other people, which is a trait of a strong and healthy Sagittarius. When Ashmedai explains why he helped the individuals, he shows his gift for prophecy, which is essentially his connection to celestial information about the future of the people he came across. Being connected to a divine plan is another trait of Sagittarius, the ability to have faith in higher powers despite the positive or negative consequences to our current terrestrial life. While the temple is being built, Solomon himself asks Ashmedai Kitovras about an important topic: how demons are able to have an advantage over human beings. This is a particularly important topic to Solomon because of his own struggles with his lower and fallen nature, which we'll examine shortly. But Ashmedai is very clever and uses the situation to trick Solomon to free himself, and he sends Solomon into exile and shapeshifts into Solomon's form to take over his kingdom. Here, in just these few sequence of events, we have the full Sagittarian theme: the ascent to power using corrupted means, and also the fall from power, Solomon's being sent into exile. Ashmedai uses this opportunity to indulge himself in Solomon's women, again the theme of using power to quench lusty and materialist desires. In the finale of the story, we are told Solomon returns to his kingdom, but he is forever scarred by the experience and is never quite the same, always fearing Ashmedai's return. The Old Testament book Ecclesiastes was written by Solomon towards the end of his days, and is a testament about how he was the wisest, richest, and most powerful king that had ever lived. But the tone of Ecclesiastes is of a world-weary man who looks back on his life with regret that everything we do is, quote, vanity, empty, futile, and short-lived. Instead, Solomon prescribes the need for seeking wisdom as the surest way to live a fulfilled life. One of the key words of Sagittarius is wisdom, the end result of our spiritual side, seeking the answers of life with a pure heart while having to cope with all of the human struggles along the way. Solomon's overindulgence in the pleasures of his kingdom, and with his traumatic exile and near defeat at the hands of Ashmedai Kitovras, left him rattled, and supposedly he was never quite the same after the ordeal. This again reflects the essential result of a fall from a height told to us by Jaimini, that no matter how high we climb, we can even be the greatest king the world has ever known, there is always a humbling waiting on the other side of that experience. The story of Solomon is a bittersweet one, for we have the book of Ecclesiastes, which is filled to the brim with wise sayings, but Solomon himself is said to have fallen into idolatry and overindulgence in his final years, becoming an old, spoiled sensualist with excessive amounts of spiritual grossness, which led to the splitting of his kingdom after his death. Solomon's life and his ordeal with Ashmedai embodies the quintessential struggle of Sagittarius, how to uphold one's own moral and spiritual principles when the world has granted you material power and influence. In the astrological context, we see that Sagittarius is a powerful yet dangerous sign because it can elevate a person to great heights based on knowledge of spiritual and religious doctrines, having the strength to express and preach those doctrines to the whole of society, and becoming a leader and example for others to follow. But the price of that power is the attempt to maintain that position indefinitely, which we learn through history is impossible, and that all empires eventually fall. To quote King Solomon in Ecclesiastes, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven." My name is Jean-Michel, and I am a Vedic astrologer. You'll find the link in the description of this video to my astrological readings, as well as a place to sign up for my quarterly solstice equinox newsletter. And as always, I look forward to your comments, and thank you for listening.